Okay, good evening. Shalom Aleichem. Nice to see you all. Welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful summer. Before I begin, Torah Anytime have asked all speakers that we encourage listeners to press the follow button. That means every time there is a new shiur, then that way you can automatically be updated about a new shiur. And please do feel free to share. The objective of Torah Anytime is to be marbitz Torah, and by doing that, apparently that will be marbitz a lot more Torah. Okay, so the first topic for tonight, the Halacha shiur, is, as you have seen, Lashon Hora in the Staffroom. Now, you might think that itself could constitute Lashon Hora, the presumption being that there is Lashon Hora being spoken in the Staffroom. What I'm, of course, referring to is the balance. On one hand, staff do need to discuss the well-being of their talmidim, of their students, and on the other hand, there are very severe halachas regarding Lashon Hora. How do you balance those two? And now that we're at the beginning of a new academic year, I thought it'd be an interesting topic to explore. It's a big topic, and we've only got a short time allocated for this. Maybe we'll revisit other aspects of it, but I just want to give a little overview about some of the general rules. Now, of course, we know that there is a presumption that everything spoken in the Staffroom about students is letoeles. Toeles means for a constructive purpose, and that is a famous heta, if you like, that it makes this sort of talk okay. It's not Lashon Hora because it's spoken letoeles. And there are 7 conditions. The Chavetz Chaim sets out 7 conditions of toeles. We'll see that invariably they're going to be fulfilled in the classroom, and we'll see, but there are other aspects that we'll have to discuss. Now, what are the 7 conditions of toeles? So the first thing is, if you look at the paragraph 1 to 7 there in the second box, second paragraph, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The first thing is to know that what you're referring to is first hand, or you know for a fact it's true. Not to conjecture, to think, to make up, etc. To know it's true. Number 2, one has to think carefully and consider all the facts and properly interpret the situation and the action involved. Don't jump to conclusions and to think things through. Another toeles condition is rebuke, that if possible, you've got to gently rebuke the perpetrator before publicizing the matter. So if you know a student did something, allegedly he did something wrong, to go and have a chat with him. Is it true that, or did I misunderstand, or whatever it may be. So that is important before sort of publicizing and discussing it broadly. One should approach, if possible, the students. Next thing is to be exact, not to exaggerate. There is a temptation to add adjectives, very, or whatever it may be, but one should report the information accurately without exaggeration. 5, and perhaps the most critical condition, is purpose. You've got to have the proper intention to achieve a proper result. This is not just an opportunity to schmooze about a student. There needs to be an intention to achieve some sort of benefit. A 6th condition is other, I've called it. If one can accomplish this result without speaking Lashon Hora, then one should try and do that. And lastly, the outcome, you can't cause any harm to the person beyond the bounds of halacha. In other words, if as a result of your speaking, there's going to be financial consequences which halacha does not prescribe, or prison, or whatever it may be, one has to tread quite carefully about that. Okay, so those are the general 7 conditions of toeles. And like I said, in a classroom, in a staff meeting where teachers are discussing the well-being of a student, it's inevitable. It's almost, it's very hard to think of a situation where you're not going to do that. Otherwise, it's just stam Lashon Hora. Now,
sorry, I don't understand that last one.
You can't cause any harm to a person as a result of your Lashon Hora. You've got to think, what are the consequences of it? So, for example, if for example, as a result of your speaking, he's going to have to pay some money which halachically he doesn't have to pay. So then you've got to consider that. There are ways to discuss that. You can just talk about the person, but therefore, if there are going to be consequences which, as a repercussion of your conversation, which are beyond what halacha would legislate, then that is a problem. And therefore you've got to consider it. You've got to discuss it with the person. You've got to, that sort of press break before you speak about it. Yeah? Okay, we'll think about it. We can talk about it afterwards. Now, the big question is, if someone sees a student do something, whether it's another teacher, whether it's a person in the public, and they want to inform teachers about it, are they allowed to? Because you're telling the Rebbe, the teacher, whoever it is, you're telling them what they see is true negative things about this person. That is the definition of Lashon Hora. So are you allowed to inform a Rebbe? Let's say, for example, I see a student in school or outside of school do something. Am I allowed to go and tell that person's teacher, Rebbe, of what I saw? Ostensibly, that's just Lashon Hora. Now, of course, why I'm telling the other person is because I think that Rebbe has a degree of responsibility and actually can do something about it. So we'll see that this actually, in most situations, is allowed, but it's interesting to see what the source is for it. The source is a Gemara in Pesachim Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara says over there, it's in the first box on the page, Omer Ravacha B'rei D'Rabba L'Ravashi, Mahu L'Memre Lei L'Rabbi L'Misnei. Are you allowed to inform the Rebbe L'Misnei, which literally means that he hates him, which means that he can take action against him? Let's just define it as that. Omer Lei, so he said, can you inform the Rebbe? If the Rebbe is confident that the person informing him is so believed, is so truthful, that it's as if there are two witnesses coming to report these facts, then he can say it. So the person who's reporting it, there's got to be some sort of understanding that the person is not just blabbering, but he is believed. Now, moreover, when it says l'Rabbi, what does that mean? So the Chavetz Chaim says, it's on the next page, the Chavetz Chaim at the bottom and in the next page says that that's referring not just only to a Rebbe, but anybody who is considered reputable, someone who's considered honest and trustworthy. So if you look at the Be'er Maim Chaim, which are the footnotes in the Chavetz Chaim, it's the second box there, on the top of the next page, Mekoirei Mehod P'sachim. The source for what the Chavetz Chaim writes is the Gemara in Pesachim, which I just read. Kanami ein mutar lesapeh stam. To some, just tell Lashon Hora about people is not allowed. Afilu leish temeheimen lei kabeitrei rakim hu ish soid v'tzonua. You can only tell a person this information if that person is discreet and is honest. Asher lo yisapeh li yoseh haman. He's not going to start telling other people. And therefore, the Chavetz Chaim interprets this Gemara essentially that there are three elements that are required in teacher discussions about a student. Number one, that the participants in this conversation are committed to the well-being and the development and the betterment, if you like, of these talmidim, of these students. Number two, that they maintain discretion, that they don't share information beyond what is necessary. So you're in the staff room and you can speak to a colleague or to another Rebbe, but not to speak to the guy next to you in shul about that person, because that's obviously not l'toeles. And third of all, and this is of course the big one, that the conversation is l'toeles. Now, that's the key point. It's reported, I saw a sefer by Rabbi Daniel Feldman, it's called Lashon Hora in Contemporary Culture, and he, very interestingly, although there are of course famously 7 conditions for toeles, he quotes that it's reported in the name of the Chazon Ish that there is essentially one simple criteria when we're talking about Lashon Hora in the staff room. What is that criteria? Good faith that there is a constructive purpose, i.e. that people in that staff meeting should maintain an attitude of love for the Talmidim and a belief in their ability that you could impact them and help them grow and progress, and there should be a sort of a constructive purpose for that meeting. And invariably in a staff setting, one hopes that you're going to tick that box quite easily. Now, the question is though, you're in the staff room, and I want to speak to that person's teacher. I know that person has got the best connection with that student. But there's another teacher in the room who doesn't teach that student. So what happens then? Does that other teacher have to leave the room? And what if that other teacher hasn't got a connection now, but may have a connection next year or year after or something like that? So it's very interesting. If you take a look in the next box, this is a tshuva of Rabbi Yashiv. So the question that went to Rabbi Yashiv is this, She'elo. When the staff, a group of teachers are sitting, and they're discussing certain children, certain students, from different classes, does a teacher, a Rabbi of a class which the student is not in other words, he doesn't teach this kid, does he have to leave the staff room? Can he be privy to this conversation? Says Rabbi Yashiv Tshuva, if the Rebbe has no constructive, beneficial reason for being there, nor at some future point, then it's appropriate that he doesn't hear. So, two interesting things. Number one, if he has no relevance to the conversation, then he should not be in the room. Better if I want to speak to a certain teacher about a certain student, so then I have a private conversation with that teacher, not in front of the whole staff room. That's ideal. However, the Rabbi Yashiv does say an interesting point, that it's at that point or it's a later point. So right now, I might not teach this kid, but I will cross paths with him next year or the year after, then that is a future connection is sufficient as well. That's also an interesting point. Now, the truth is, there are other grounds to make sure that if you want to have a staff meeting and various teachers are party to this discussion, then it would be permitted for other teachers to stay if certain grounds are met. Number one, any of these grounds. Number one, I'm reading from paragraph 3, these 3 bullet points. Number one, discussing other teachers bring an enhanced perspective. So for example, if I have another Rebbe there who's an experienced Rebbe, he doesn't teach this kid, he doesn't know this kid, but I want to involve him because I appreciate his experience. So that's okay. That's a toeles. Number 2, that another teacher may have some insight about the student's backgrounds or challenges. Again, that's a toeles. And third of all, and this is an interesting one, a teacher who may have a wider school perspective and can better ascertain the impact of this student on other students in the school. So I may not teach that student, but I know that I know the school situation generally, and I know these are the issues and what impact that could have on other students. So any of these conditions would be sufficient to allow Lashon Hora, or this conversation, to actually transpire. Now, there is also another interesting source, the Siach HaTamar, I've got in the paragraph 4 at the bottom, that the reality is, in practice, there is a widespread practice, I think, across the teaching world, that many teachers will be present in the meeting. And the rationale for that is based on a pasuk in Mishlei. It appears twice in Mishlei. The pasuk says, Teshua b'rov yoyetz, which means, effectively, that if you are sitting in a group of more people, then more eitzah will come about. It will be a more productive meeting, i.e., several committed and experienced professionals conferring together will produce guidance that is of a superior quality. That's really the idea. And if you look there in the last box, it says umeyato kivan she'yesh l'tzamtzem. It's very hard to sort of quantify this. Umiyot hadibru mazik hu kairabas, and not speaking is also dangerous. That's your job. You're there to try and help these students. And therefore you do need to converse about the students. That's the kavanah of Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei ba'omrei ki teshua b'rov yoyetz v'hainu ki b'harbe, with many other people, with many experienced professional teachers. Who knows which one is going to give the good idea, the insight? Maybe it's not the actual Rebbe or teacher of this student who's going to come up with a clever idea or a good insight. When teachers gather together, and the objective is to try and help the student, the whole dibur, the whole conversation is considered the toeles. You've got to be careful not to step over the mark. It can't be that you carry on, you prolong the conversation, or you bring up things which are not relevant. So one has to have that balance. But generally speaking, it's the concept of to'eles is very applicable, and of course the 7 conditions need to be borne in mind, but it's very likely that all 7 are going to be easily met, and especially according to this idea of the Chazon Ish, that there is one simple criteria, namely a constructive purpose and intention to have this conversation in order to help the student, then that would suffice. Okay, Beseda. So again, there's more to discuss, and maybe in a future time we'll talk about another aspect which I came across there isn't time for now, and that is asking students themselves information about other students. That's an interesting topic, but maybe we'll revisit that at some point. Yeah.
We might be opening another whole thing, but let's say you want to talk about a class as a whole, and obviously it's not every student in the class, because there's always something.
Right.
Is that painting a picture? Is that
It's very easy
to always specify, not everyone, but
it's easy to label. Year 8 and this class is this, that, or the other. It's easy to make generalizations, and I think it's understood to me that they are quite a challenging year. That doesn't mean that every single student in the year is challenging, but again, if you say that year X, Y, or Z is a challenging year group, then it might need specific interaction. It will have whatever that may be, whatever is appropriate, whatever the issues are.
You have to say they are a challenging year group. Obviously, there are some.
No, I don't. I think it's understood.
Right.
I think it's understood if you say there's one year group is a challenging year group, that there are exceptions, but that is true. It is a challenging year group.
Right.
There are some tzaddikim in the year group, and there are some kids who are more challenging, and therefore it needs special handling.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Hashem, so we'll perhaps revisit this topic another time.